Welcome back, drowsy traveler. Tonight we're going somewhere green and gray and windswept, the west of Ireland in the 1840s, in the years before and during the event the Irish still call on Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger. It is one of the most consequential decades in the history of any nation, and it is a story that half of America carries somewhere in its bloodline, whether they know it or not. Before we set out, if these long, slow journeys into the past help you drift off, consider subscribing so you never lose your way back here, and leave a comment with the oldest family story your family still tells, the one that's been passed down longer than anyone can remember. If you don't have one, just tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now dim the lights, settle deep into your pillow, and let your breathing slow. We have a long road tonight, through boglands and stone walls and turf smoke, and there is no hurry at all, none whatsoever. Let's begin. You wake before the light does. That's the first thing to understand about your life. The day starts in darkness, in a one-room cabin with walls of packed mud and stone, under a roof of thatched rushes that your father and his brothers cut from the bog 2 summers ago. The fire in the hearth never fully died in the night. It never does. There is a saying in your townland that a hearth fire, once lit at a marriage, should burn until the last of the family leaves the house, and yours has been burning in one form or another for longer than anyone living can remember. You lie still for a moment on your bed of straw and heather under a woven blanket listening. The wind is coming off the Atlantic the way it almost always is, pressing against the western wall of the cabin like a great patient hand. Somewhere in the dark, the cow shifts her weight. Yes, the cow is inside, at the lower end of the cabin, behind a low partition. In winter, her warmth is worth more than the smell, and the smell, honestly, you stopped noticing years ago. You are 26 years old. You are a cottier, a laborer who rents a cabin and a patch of ground from a farmer, who rents his land from a middleman, who rents it from a landlord, who may never have seen this valley in his life. You own almost nothing. And yet, on this particular morning in 1844, you would not describe yourself as poor in the way a visitor from London might describe you. You have a wife, 2 small children asleep in the warm hollow of the bed, a pig fattening by the door, and, most important of all, more important than anything, you have the potatoes. Your wife rises first, as she always does, and rakes the embers apart, feeding the fire with dried turf from the stack beside the door. Turf, cut peat from the bog, is the fuel of your entire world. It burns low and slow and sweet, and its smoke has soaked into everything you own, your clothes, your hair, the thatch above you, the very walls. For the rest of your life, wherever you go, the smell of a turf fire will mean home to you in a way no word ever could. Breakfast is potatoes. Lunch, when it comes, will be potatoes. Dinner, eaten in the long twilight, will also be potatoes, boiled in a great 3-legged iron pot over the fire, tumbled out into a shallow basket called a skib, set in the middle of the floor while the family gathers around. You will eat them with your fingers, peeling the skins with a thumbnail kept slightly long for exactly that purpose, dipping each one in a little salt or in buttermilk if there is any, and you will eat an amount that would astonish a modern person. Because here is the truth of your diet, and it is not an exaggeration. A working man in the west of Ireland in the 1840s eats somewhere between 10 and 14 pounds of potatoes every single day. Your wife eats perhaps 8 or 9. Even your children put away several pounds each. The potato is not part of your diet. The potato is your diet, breakfast, dinner, and supper, 365 days a year, with a splash of buttermilk, the occasional egg, a herring now and then if the fishing was good, and a bit of bacon perhaps a few times a year, at Christmas and Easter, if the pig did well. And you are, by the standards of the age, surprisingly healthy on it. Travelers to Ireland write home in amazement about it. The potato with buttermilk is one of the strange accidents of history, a nearly complete diet, rich in vitamin C, potassium, protein enough to build tall, strong bodies. Irish laborers of your generation are, on average, taller than English factory workers. Your teeth are better. Visitors remark constantly on the health and good looks of the Irish poor, usually in the same breath as they remark on the shocking poverty of their cabins. That is the paradox you live inside. You are among the poorest people in Western Europe and among the best fed. Both things are true at once, and both things depend entirely, completely, without any backup plan of any kind, on one plant, growing in the ridged beds outside your door. So before anything else tonight, let's go out into the gray morning light, pull your coat around you, and look at it properly. Let's look at the potato. Walk out of the cabin door, duck under the low lintel, and stand a moment in the cool, damp air. Spread out before you, running down the slope toward the stream, are the ridges, long parallel mounds of earth, each about 4 feet wide, separated by narrow trenches. The English call them lazy beds, which is a small insult wrapped in a name, because there is nothing lazy about them at all. They are a masterpiece of adaptation. In thin, wet, stony western soil, where a plow would be useless even if you could afford one, the ridge does everything. The trenches drain the endless rain, the mounded earth warms faster in spring, and the whole thing is built by hand with a single tool, the loy, a long, narrow spade with a footrest, an implement so central to your life that entire matches and contests are held around the skill of using it. Every spring, you and your neighbors turn the sod, layer it with whatever manure the cow and pig and seaweed from the shore can provide, and set the seed potatoes in the ridge. Seaweed, that's worth pausing on. If you live near the coast, you haul cartloads of it up from the strand after storms, glistening brown heaps of it, and dig it into the beds, and it feeds the soil the way little else can. Whole stretches of the western coastline have been made fertile by generations of families carrying the sea onto the land, basket by basket on their backs. The potato you grow has a name, the lumper. Say it kindly, because it will not be treated kindly by history. The lumper is a big, knobbly, watery, pale potato that gourmets sneer at. Even in your own time, people with a choice consider it barely fit food. But the lumper has one towering virtue. It grows almost anywhere, in almost anything, and it yields enormously. On soil that would break a wheat farmer's heart, a single acre of lumpers can feed a family of 6 for most of a year, with enough left over for the pig. No grain on earth comes close. An acre of oats might feed a family for a few months. An acre of potatoes feeds them for 10, and feeds the animals too. And that single fact, that 1 acre of bad land plus one plant equals one fed family is the quiet engine behind everything else in your world. It is why Ireland's population has exploded to nearly 8.5 million people, one of the most densely populated countrysides in Europe. It is why land has been divided and subdivided, generation after generation, into smaller and smaller patches, because 1/4 of an acre of potato ground is enough to marry on, enough to raise children on. It is why you, a man with no money, no lease, and no prospects a banker would recognize, could nonetheless build a cabin, take a wife, and fill a bed with warm sleeping children. The potato made your life possible. Hold on to that thought, because it is also the trap. About 3 million people in Ireland, a third of the entire nation, live the way you do, almost totally dependent on the potato, with no meaningful savings, no stores of grain, and no second option. Another few million rely on it heavily. The grain that Ireland grows in golden abundance, and it does grow grain, fields, and fields of oats, and barley and wheat, especially in the richer East. The grain is not for eating. That grain is for rent. It is sold, shipped, exported, converted into the money that flows upward through the layers of the land system, from you to the farmer, to the middleman, to the landlord, to, very often, London. You grow food for others and potatoes for yourself. Everyone you know does the same. It has worked, more or less, for 100 years. There have been failures before, partial ones, local ones, hungry summers when the old crop ran out before the new one came in. The months of June and July even have a name: the meal months, the hungry gap, when families buy oatmeal on credit and tighten their belts and wait for the new potatoes. There was real famine in 1740, a century ago, in a year of freak cold, the year of slaughter, the old people call it, though almost no one now living remembers it. Everyone knows the potato can fail. What no one knows, what no one can know, standing in this gray morning in 1844, looking at the healthy green stalks, is that the potato can fail everywhere, all at once, year after year after year. You have never heard of a microscopic organism called Phytophthora infestans. Nobody on Earth understands it yet. The scientists of your day will argue about whether the coming blight is caused by rain, by fog, by static electricity from railway locomotives, by the wrath of God. It is, in fact, a water mold, a tiny spore-borne parasite that has been quietly crossing the world in the holds of ships, and by the summer of 1845 it will have reached the fields of Flanders, and then England, sauce, and then in the soft, wet autumn air that its spores love more than anything, it will come here. But not yet, not this morning. This morning the stalks are green, the ridges are full, the pig is fat, and your children are waking up hungry for their breakfast, which is potatoes, which there are plenty of. Let's spend a little more time in this world while it is still whole. You'll want to remember it as it was. Come back inside for a while, out of the wind, and let your eyes adjust to the dimness. This single room is your entire built world, so it deserves a slow look. The cabin is perhaps 20 feet long and 12 wide. The floor is beaten earth, swept smooth, hard as tile near the hearth, where generations of feet have polished it. The walls are stone and mud, whitewashed inside with lime when times are good, and the whitewash does something lovely with the firelight in the evenings. The whole room glows a warm amber, and shadows move on the walls like slow company. There is one small window, maybe two, and they are small on purpose. Glass is taxed and expensive, wind is free and constant, and a small window keeps the warmth in. The furniture would fit in a single cart, and someday, in a worse year, it may have to. A dresser against the wall, the one real piece of furniture, the pride of the house, holding the delf, the few plates and cups, arranged for display as much as for use, a table, a few stools, and a low chair or two, the iron pot, the kettle, the skib basket, a wooden chest for clothes and the Sunday shawl, a spinning wheel in the corner, because your wife, like nearly every woman in the townland, spins wool and flax when the light allows, and the few pennies that brings in are part of the delicate arithmetic that keeps the household afloat. And here is something a modern visitor would miss completely. By the standards of your class, this is not a bad house. The census takers of 1841 sorted Irish housing into four classes, and nearly half the families of the West live in fourth class housing. One room cabins exactly like this, or worse, some of them windowless, some dug partly into the hillside, some shared with more animals than yours. Your cabin, with its two windows, and its dresser, and its pig, sits comfortably in the third class, and you know families who would consider it fine. The day's work is long, but it has a shape, and the shape is the year. In spring, you plant, the ridge is turned, the seed set, always around St. Patrick's Day, because the old wisdom says the crop should be in the ground by then. In summer, you hire out. This is the crucial part. Your own patch feeds you, but it earns you nothing, so the rent must come from your labor. You work for the strong farmer up the valley at planting and haymaking and harvest, and the wages are set against your rent in a system called coniker. You may never touch an actual coin from one season to the next. Money, real money, passes through your hands, perhaps a few pounds in a year. Some men in your townland go further for work. They are called spalpeans, migrant harvest laborers who walk to the rich farms of the East or take the boat to England and Scotland for the harvest season, sleeping in barns, sending money home, coming back in autumn with cash sewn into their coats. Their potato patches are planted before they leave and dug after they return, and their wives run the household alone all summer. It is hard, and it is normal, and it is one more thread in the web that keeps families like yours alive. Autumn is the digging, the whole family in the ridges, with the grape and their hands, the children gathering, the pit being built. You store the crop in that pit, right in the field, a long mound of potatoes lined and covered with rushes and earth, snug against the frost. There is no barn, no cellar. The pit is your granary, your savings account, your insurance policy. Everything you have is in the ground, in one form or another. And winter is the fireside. The work slows, the nights stretch out to 15 hours of darkness, and the cabin becomes what it truly is. Not just a shelter, but a small, warm theater of family life, lit by turf flame and a rushlight, full of talk. We'll come back to those winter nights, because they hold the treasure of this world. But first, you should understand the invisible architecture that this whole life hangs from, the system that owns the ground under your feet. Here is a question with a strange answer. Who owns the field your potatoes grow in? You don't, obviously. You rent your cabin and your acre from Michael, the strong farmer up the valley, on a yearly agreement, sealed with a handshake. No lease, no paper, no rights. Michael rents his 30 acres from a man in the market town, an agent and middleman who holds a long lease on the whole townland. The middleman leases from the landlord, and the landlord, the actual owner, the name on the deeds, is in your case a gentleman who lives in England, who inherited 11,000 Irish acres from an uncle, and who has visited this estate twice in his life. His interest in the valley arrives twice a year in the form of a demand for rent and departs in the form of money. This is the pyramid, and versions of it cover most of Ireland. At the top, a few thousand landowners, many resident and some genuinely engaged, many absentee, some hopelessly in debt themselves, their estates mortgaged to the chimneys. Beneath them, layers of middlemen, each layer squeezing the one below, because a middleman's profit is precisely the difference between the rent he pays and the rent he collects. Beneath them, the farmers, large and small, and at the bottom, the widest layer of all, courtiers and laborers like you, millions strong, holding your ground from year to year at the pleasure of the man above you. What the pyramid produces, above all, is insecurity. You could be the best tenant in the county, rent paid, ridges neat, cabin whitewashed, and still lose everything at a landlord's whim, or a middleman's bankruptcy, or a farmer's decision that grazing cattle would pay better than renting to you. If you improve the land, drain a field, build a better house, the improvement belongs to the landlord, and your reward may well be higher rent, since the holding is now worth more. So the system quietly teaches everyone the same lesson. Don't build, don't invest, don't improve. Hold your ground lightly, because it was never yours. There is one more feature of the pyramid you need to understand, because it decides who lives and who dies in the years ahead. Subdivision. When a farmer's children marry, the traditional answer is to split the holding, a few acres for each son, a corner of the field for a new cabin. The potato makes this possible, as we said. Tiny patches can feed families. So year by year, generation by generation, the holdings shrink and the people multiply, until whole districts of the West are a patchwork of plots too small to pay rent from anything except labor and luck. Some parishes in County Mayo and County Galway have thousands of families on holdings of 5 acres or less. The system is not just fragile, it is fragile at scale, everywhere, all at once. The men who administer this world can see the danger. Royal commissions have studied Irish poverty and written enormous reports about it. One of them concluded, just a few years ago, that Ireland's laboring population endures greater privation than any in Europe, that a third of the country is on the edge of subsistence. Everyone with eyes can see the mathematics. One crop, 8 million people, no reserves. What no one has done, or will do in time, is change it. And you know nothing of commissions. You know the valley. You know that Michael is fair as farmers go, that the agent is hard but not cruel, that the rent has been met every year of your marriage so far, and that as long as the potatoes come up, the whole tottering pyramid stays standing, and the small warm life inside your cabin walls goes on. As long as the potatoes come up. But your world is bigger than the cabin and the valley, and once a month it proves it. Tomorrow is fair day in the market town. The pig is fat enough at last, and the whole townland is going in. Let's go with you. You are up at 3 in the morning for this, and nobody complains, because fair day is the closest thing your working year has to a holiday. The pig goes in front, driven along the dark road with a hazel switch and a great deal of commentary, and she is not just a pig, so give her the respect she is owed. In the economy of the cabin, the pig is the bank. She was bought as a squealing slip in spring with borrowed shillings, fed all year on the small potatoes and the peelings and the leavings, food that cost you nothing but would otherwise have gone to waste. And now, fattened, she will be converted at the fair into the single largest sum of money your household will touch all year, the rent, or most of it. The gentleman who pays the rent, people call the pig, only half joking. Half the cabins of Ireland keep one, and the whole delicate machine of your year turns on her doing well. So, yes, she lived indoors by the door, like one of the family. She practically was. The road fills as the light comes up. Every boreen adds its own small procession, cattle swaying ahead of boys with sticks, sheep in muddled flocks, carts of butter firkins and oat sacks, women with baskets of eggs and knitted stockings, girls carrying hens tied by the legs, old men who have nothing to sell and would not miss it for the world. By the time you reach the town, the main street has disappeared under animals. Fair day takes over a town completely. Cattle tethered to every rail and window sill, dealers moving through the crowd slapping hands, the street loud with bargaining in two languages, and every doorway doing more business than it will see again for a month. Watch a bargain being made, because it is theater with rules. The buyer scorns the pig. You praise her ancestry back several generations. He walks away twice. You let him. A third man, every fair has them, born matchmakers of livestock, appears from nowhere to split the difference, seizes your wrist and the buyer's, and slaps your palms together, and the deal is done, sealed with a spit and a shilling of luck money handed back for goodwill. No paper, no signature. A palm struck at a fair is a contract as binding as anything a Dublin lawyer could draft, and everyone present is a witness. With the pig money folded deep in an inside pocket, most of it already spoken for by the rent, the day opens out a little. There are stalls, ribbons, tobacco, salt, a tin of tea for your wife, sweets for the children if the price was good. There is the shop where the account is settled or stretched. There is in the corner of your eye the pawnbroker's 3 brass balls, an establishment your family has visited in tight springs before now, the good coat lodged in April, redeemed after harvest, a rhythm so ordinary that half the townland's Sunday clothes spend the summer months in the same back room. Remember the pawn shop. In the years ahead, it becomes one of the quiet gauges of catastrophe, and its shelves will fill with things no one comes back for. And the fair is a labor exchange too. Was in the hiring corner, spalpeens stand with their spades, waiting for the strong farmers of the East to look them over and make terms for the harvest season. A hard, proud, humbling piece of business, men priced by the look of their shoulders. Your own cousin stands there this morning. By June, he will be cutting hay in Kildare. By October, he will walk home with coins sewn into his waistband, and his family's rent will be in them. The day softens as it goes. There is porter in the public houses and fiddle music spilling out of them. There is a ballad singer working the crowd, selling the words of the newest songs on printed sheets. There are matches being quietly weighed by mothers on both sides, for the fair is where townlands mix, and more than livestock finds a home out of it. In your father's day, there might have been a faction fight before evening, whole clans of cousins settling ancient scores with blackthorn sticks and enormous enjoyment. The priests have mostly preached that pleasure out of fashion, though the old men describe it the way other men describe lost youth. Then the long road home in the dusk, lighter by one pig and heavier by 1 year's security, the children asleep on the cart among the empty baskets, the townland's lanterns strung out along the boreens ahead of you like a rosary. Take a good look back at the town, its windows warm behind you. Everything you saw today, the bank that was a pig, the contract that was a handshake, the savings account that was a coat in a pawn shop, the insurance that was a cousin's shoulders. This is what economists would call a system with no reserves, and what you would call, reasonably enough, a life that has always worked so far. Every rope in it is about to be tested at once, but not tonight. Tonight the fire is waiting, and it is nearly winter, and winter means the neighbors, and the neighbors mean the stories. Let's have one more evening by the fire, a good one, a night with the house full, before the weather turns, and the story turns with it. It is a night in late November, 1844, and your cabin is full. The word went around the townland after dark, the way it does. Tonight the gathering is at your house. Neighbors have come across the fields with lanterns, stooping in under the lintel, taking their places by the fire in an order everyone understands without discussion. The old people nearest the warmth, the men along the wall, the women with their knitting and spinning where the light is best, the children packed together in the shadows at the edge, told to be quiet and utterly failing. This is the ceilidh, the visiting night, the night house, the beating heart of winter. And what happens here is the true wealth of your world, the wealth the census takers cannot count. First, the talk, news of the townland, of the fair, of prices and marriages and the doings of the agent. Then, as the night settles, the stories. There is a man in your parish, every parish has one, who carries in his head an entire library that has never been written down. Hero tales of Fionn and the Fianna that run for hours, tales of voyages and enchantments, tales of the fairies who live in the raths and under the whitethorn trees, and who must be spoken of carefully and never, ever offended. A seanchaí, such a man is called, a bearer of old lore. When he speaks, even the children go still. The firelight moves on the walls, the wind works at the thatch, and a story that may be 1,000 years old fills the room like a living thing. All of it, the stories, the talk, the prayers before bed, the songs, all of it is in Irish. That is worth pausing on. In this valley, in most of the West, Irish is not a heritage or a school subject. It is simply the language, the water everyone swims in. English belongs to the market town, to the courts and the rent office, and plenty of your neighbors have only a little of it. Several million people in Ireland live their whole inner lives in Irish, one of the oldest written languages in Europe, carrying its poetry and its jokes and its 10 different words for rain. Hold that in mind gently, because the coming years will fall on this language like an axe. There are songs tonight, too, and there may be a fiddle and if the mood is right, the door's taken off its hinges and laid on the floor so a dancer has a sprung surface to batter out steps on. There is a drink of milk, or if the still up the mountain has been busy, something stronger. There is laughter, a great deal of laughter, sharp and quick, because verbal wit is a competitive sport here, and reputations are made and lost on a good retort. And beneath it all runs the deep grammar of your community, the Maytheal, the working together, the unwritten law that says neighbors save each other's hay, dig each other's potatoes when someone is sick, gather to raise a cabin in a day for a new couple. Nobody in this valley faces anything entirely alone. Not harvest, not sickness, not death. The wake for the dead is itself a gathering, sometimes even a strangely merry one for the very old, with the house full for 2 nights, the pipes lit, the stories told, the departed seen out of the world in company. There is faith holding hands with all of it, Mass on Sunday, even if it means walking miles, the rosary at night, the patterned days at the holy well when the whole parish turns out, and woven through the faith, older things, the Pysiogs, the small charms and cautions, the May morning customs, the care taken never to disturb a fairy fort. Your world is enchanted from hedge to hedge, and you would not think to separate the strands. Take a long look at this room, drowsy traveler, the firelight, the language, the crowded warmth of it. This is what a third of a nation looked like on the eve of catastrophe, poor in everything money measures, and wealthy in nearly everything else. Now the neighbors are pulling on their coats. The fire is raked low. Sleep comes easily here, and tonight let it. Because the next time we stand in this valley, it will be autumn of 1845, and something will be wrong with the air. It begins, for you, with a smell. It is a morning in September, 1845, and you are walking the path along the top of the ridges when it reaches you, a sweetish, heavy, rotten smell like nothing you can name, not the byre, not the bog, not carrion exactly. Something wrong. You stop. The valley looks strange, and it takes your eyes a moment to tell you why. The potato gardens, which were a deep, healthy green 2 days ago, are stained. Blotches of black and brown across the leaves, as if fire had passed over in the night without heat. Some stalks have collapsed entirely, folded down on themselves, slimy and dark. You walk into your own ridges, with your heart going hard. You take a stalk and pull, and it comes up too easily, and the smell rises with it. Some of the potatoes at the root look sound, others are marked with spreading brown patches, and when you press one with your thumb, the skin gives way over a wet, foul softness. All over the valley, other figures are standing in other gardens, doing exactly what you are doing. Nobody is calling out to anybody. That is the detail you will remember, the silence of that morning, broken only by wind, everyone standing separately in their own ruin, working the same terrible arithmetic. The news when people finally gather is confused and contradictory, and it will stay that way for months. The blight, for that is the word that attaches itself at once, has struck here but spared the next valley, ruined the low gardens, but passed over the high ones, taken one field entirely, and left its neighbor untouched. Men dig test holes and find sound potatoes under blackened stalks and dare to hope. Then the same potatoes, pitted and stored, melt into stinking pulp within weeks, and the hope goes with them. The rot follows the crop into the pits. That is one of the cruelest discoveries of that first autumn, that you cannot outrun this thing by digging fast, because it travels with what you save. What is it? Nobody knows. Truly nobody. Anywhere. The newspapers and the learned gentlemen offer theories in all directions. Too much rain, vapors from the earth, the new railway locomotives, a judgment from heaven. A government scientific commission studies the problem earnestly and gets the answer wrong. One or two lonely voices suggest the truth, a living fungus like organism spreading by spore on the wind and the rain, and are politely ignored. The remedy, if anyone had listened, would still have been decades away. What you know in your valley by the time the digging is done is the only arithmetic that matters. Something between a third and half of the crop is gone. Gone before winter has even started, with 10 months to cross before another harvest. And here is where tonight's story earns its title, so let's say it plainly, softly, once. You would not survive what is coming, not because you are weak, and not because you would make the wrong choices. Almost no choice you could make in the years ahead will matter as much as facts already fixed before the blight ever landed. Which county you stand in, how many acres your family holds, how far you live from a port town, what kind of man your landlord happens to be, and whether your government across the sea decides your life is its responsibility. Survival in the Great Hunger was distributed like weather. The people who came through were not braver or smarter than the ones who didn't. They were overwhelmingly luckier, and most of the luck had been dealt out years before in the shape of the land pyramid we walked through earlier. You are courtier on your single conifer acre in the far west, hold almost the worst hand it is possible to hold. Remember that as we go on, not with dread, but the way you'd remember it, reading any history, at this distance, in a warm bed, with the wind outside belonging to your own century, and not to theirs. But the first winter, the winter of 1845 into 1846, is not yet the catastrophe. It is the rehearsal. And strangely enough, it is also the proof that the catastrophe was never inevitable. Let's see how you get through it. The winter after the first failure is hungry, anxious, and, this is the remarkable thing, survivable. Almost everyone survives it. To understand why, you have to look at two men, one in your cabin and one in London. The man in the cabin is you, and you are not helpless. Your class has been managing scarcity for generations, and the old machinery of coping starts up at once. The sound potatoes are sorted and hoarded with a care that borders on reverence. Eaten small, eaten sparingly, the seed potatoes for spring set aside and guarded like treasure, because eating your seed is eating your future. The pig is sold early, before everyone else sells theirs, and the price collapses. The oats that were meant for rent become a negotiation. Some landlords and farmers, seeing what has happened, give time. Others do not. Your wife's spending money stops being extra and starts being essential. The spring work, when it comes, is thrown into the ground with desperate energy, more ridges than ever before, because everyone reasons the same way. Whatever this blight was, the answer is to plant more. And there is the shop, the Gombean man, as the harder version of him is called, where meal can be had on credit at interest that would make a banker blush. Debt spreads through the townlands that winter, like a second, quieter blight. But debt, for now, buys food, and food is life. The man in London is the Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel, and he has seen Irish scarcity before. Whatever else history says of him, Peel takes the reports from Ireland seriously and moves fast. Quietly, without waiting for his cabinet's blessing, he orders £100,000 worth of Indian corn, American maize, bought and shipped to Ireland. Not to feed everyone, there is nowhere near enough for that. The purpose is cleverer. The government corn sits in depots, and whenever food prices begin to spiral, it is released cheaply into the market, and the spiral stops. Speculators can't corner a market that the government can flood at will. Food prices in that first winter stay, roughly, within reach. The corn itself is nobody's favorite. It arrives as hard flint maize that must be ground twice and cooked long, or it punishes the stomachs of people who have never eaten it. The people christen it Peel's brimstone, partly for its sulphur yellow color and partly out of general principle. There are riots in some ports and hardship everywhere, and the meal months of that summer are crueler than any in living memory. But the machinery, public works for wages, relief committees, the corn depots, holds the country together. In the first year of the blight, Ireland does not starve. Hold on to that fact. It is one of the most important in the whole story, and it is the reason honest historians wince at the word famine standing alone. The island, even in the bad years, is producing food, grain, cattle, butter, pork, and in that first winter, government action kept the gap between the poor and that food narrow enough to cross. What happens next is not the failure of a crop. The crop already failed, and the people came through. What happens next is the failure of a response. Peel's government falls in the summer of 1846, brought down with grim irony, partly by the very measures he took to free up the food trade. The new government under Lord John Russell is of a different mind entirely. Its guiding lights believe with genuine religious conviction in the science of their age, that markets must not be interfered with, that government charity corrupts the poor, that Irish property must pay for Irish poverty, and that this crisis, properly handled, might even be an opportunity to teach Ireland better habits. The civil servant who runs relief policy, Charles Trevelyan, is tireless, incorruptible, meticulous, and utterly convinced that too much help is more dangerous than too little. The corn depots are to be run down. The rules are to be tightened. Ireland, the new thinking goes, must be thrown on her own resources. And it is at exactly this moment, the worst possible moment, the hinge of the whole story, that you walk out one morning in August 1846 into air that smells Swedish and heavy and wrong, and see the second blight moving through the gardens like a tide. The second failure is not like the first. The first was a wound. This is an erasure. The blight of 1846 comes early, spreads with the wet summer wind, and takes essentially everything. Fields that were green on a Sunday are black by the following Sunday. A traveler crossing the country that August writes of watching the destruction advance week by week along his route, of the wailing of women in the gardens, of whole districts where not one sound potato can be found. The extra ridges that everyone planted in the spring, the great gamble of Mór, are annihilated along with everything else, and the seed that went into them is gone too. Where the first failure took a third to a half of the harvest, The second takes it nearly all. Out of every 10 ridges you planted, perhaps a quarter of one comes up sound. Do the arithmetic with the people of your townland, standing in the lanes that autumn, because everyone is doing it and it is very short. There is no crop. There was no surplus from last year. The pig was sold last winter. The meal shop credit is already stretched, and it is only September. 12 months stand between this moment and the next possible harvest, and the way across those months is simply not there. What do you actually eat in the autumn and winter of 1846? You eat downward through the layers of the world. The cabbages and turnips go first, where anyone grew them. Then the hens, then the last of the hoarded meal, blackberries and mushrooms while they last, the nettles and wild greens, charlock, sorrel, boiled into a bitterness that fills without feeding. If you live near the shore, the sea becomes a lifeline of sorts. Dulse and carrageen seaweed, limpets and periwinkles prized off the rocks at low tide, and the strands of the west are lined some days with families gathering, gleaning the tide line the way their ancestors gleaned fields. Inland there is not even that. The animals feel it with you. The cow, the buttermilk, the last protein your children had, goes to the fair and is sold for a fraction of her worth, because every fair in Ireland is full of cows being sold by people who can no longer feed them or must convert them into meal. Some families, further west, bleed their cattle a little and mix the blood with greens, an old trick from older hungers, for as long as the cattle last. And here is the bitterest thread of that winter, the one that will be remembered longest, the food that leaves. The oat harvest did not fail. The barley did not fail. The cattle and the butter did not fail. Through that terrible autumn, the carts still roll to the ports because rent must still be paid, and contracts must still be honored, and the market must not be interfered with. And grain ships still sail out of Irish harbors, sometimes under guard, past crowds of the hungry standing on the quays. In pure economic terms, the picture is complicated, and honest historians will argue for 2 centuries about how much difference stopping those exports would have made. But you are not living in pure economic terms. You are living in a valley where children are hungry within sight of loaded carts, and what that plants in the memory of a people does not come out again. The word famine is beginning to be said now, in the newspapers, in the pulpits, in the government dispatches, though in your townland people mostly say the simpler, older thing, the hunger, and Gorta. The government's answer this winter is not food. The depots are closed or empty by policy. Food, London has ruled, is the business of merchants. The answer is work. If the poor of Ireland want relief, they must earn it, on the public works, at task rates, in the open, through what is about to become the most savage winter Ireland has seen in living memory. But before we walk out onto the works, there is a question you may already be asking, the question nearly everyone asks at this point in the story, looking at a map of Ireland, an island ringed on every side by an ocean full of fish. Why didn't they simply fish? It is a fair question, and it has a real answer. So let's take the shore road for a while. Stand on the western strand on a winter morning and look at the Atlantic. And the first thing to understand is that you are not looking at a pantry. You are looking at one of the most dangerous coastlines in Europe. The fish are out there, certainly, but the great shoals, The herring and mackerel and cod in their thousands run in deep water, miles offshore, and in winter that water is a killing place. The boat your coast uses is the curragh, a light, open frame of laths covered in tarred canvas or hide, a beautiful and ancient design, quick as a bird in skilled hands, and utterly unsuited to working deep water in Atlantic winter weather. It carries 3 or 4 men and no shelter and very little margin. The bigger decked vessels that could ride out a January gale on the fishing grounds cost more money than a whole townland of cabins sees in a year. Irish fishing before the Blight is for the most part a small boat, fair weather inshore affair, a supplement to the potato, never a substitute for it, and the fishing families themselves eat potatoes like everyone else, and are exactly as poor. And here is the cruel gearing of it, the part the question never guesses. The fishery and the potato were not separate systems where one could catch the other as it fell. They were the same system. The bait for the long lines was very often potato fed shellfish and scraps. The fish that was caught was sold to people whose purses emptied the moment the potato died, so the market for fish collapsed precisely when the fish were needed most, and the salt to cure a big catch for keeping, an industrial commodity, taxed and traded, was scarce and dear in the poor West. A curragh crew could risk their lives for a catch they could neither sell nor store. Then comes the detail that historians still write about with a kind of ache. As the hunger tightened through 1846 and 1847, the fishing families of the West did what every family with anything left did. They carried their possessions to the pawnbroker. And what a fishing family owns when the furniture is gone is gear. Nets went over the pawnshop counters of Galway and Westport and Dingle by the hundredweight. Lines, sails, oars, the boats themselves, pledged for a few shillings worth of meal, with every intention of redeeming them when times turned. Which is to say, at the exact moment the sea became the last resource, the coast, cabin by cabin, was trading away the only tools that could reach it. Relief committees and the Quakers saw it happening and understood exactly what it meant. Among the wisest charity of the whole period was Quaker money spent buying nets back out of pawn and establishing fishing stations along the coast, and where that happened, it saved lives. The shore itself, the strip between tides that belongs to no landlord, gave what it could, and in the famine townships of the coast, it gave enormously. Seaweeds, first, dulse dried in the wind, carrageen boiled to a settling jelly, seagrass gathered by the armful, shellfish, prized and dug, limpets above all, the hard little cones that no one ate in good years, harvested now in such quantities that to this day, around old cabin sites on the western shore, the middens of famine-era limpet shells lie in the grass like drifts of gray snow. Whole families moved to the coast and lived on the tide line for a season. It was real food, and it was never enough. Thin, salty, laborious calories, a holding action rather than a rescue, and the strands within walking distance of the hungriest districts were stripped as clean as the fields had been. So when the question comes, why didn't they fish? The honest answer is that they did, where they could, with what they had left, and the sea took its own toll of curraghs that went out in weather no curragh should see. The fuller answer is the one this whole night keeps returning to. Survival was a matter of equipment, position, and margin, and the coast's margins had been pawned, tide by tide, to buy meal. The sea at the door was like the grain in the carts, food within sight, and a system standing between. All right, the shore has told us what it knows. The wind is getting up, the light is going, and inland on the new works, 700,000 people are about to earn their bread through the worst winter of the century. So pull your coat tight, drowsy traveler. We are going out onto the famine roads across Ireland today. If you know what you are looking at, you can still find them. Roads that begin in one empty place and end in another, piers on lonely shores that no boat has ever seriously used, walls that climb mountains and enclose nothing. The people call them famine roads. They are the fossil record of the winter of 1846 and 47, and you are about to help build one. Here is how the system works on paper. The government will lend money to Irish districts for public works, roads, drainage, breaking stones, and the destitute will be employed on them for wages. And with the wages, they will buy food from merchants, and the market will thus be respected. The idle will be tested, and nobody will get something for nothing. The works must be, in the official word, unproductive. They must not improve any private land or compete with any private business, which is why so many of them go from nowhere to nowhere. Payment is by task, by measured piecework, so that effort can be verified. It is all very rational, in an office in London. We're just about halfway down tonight's road, drowsy traveler. If you're still with me, half here, half in the 1840s. A quiet tap on the like button helps more sleepless people find their way to these long journeys, and it means more than you know. And if you've already drifted off, then this video has done its job, and I'll take your silence as the finest review there is. Let's go back out into the cold then, and see how the plan on paper met the actual winter. Now here is how it works in your valley, in the flesh. You walk perhaps 3 miles, perhaps 6, to the works, in the dark before dawn, because the day is measured and you cannot afford to lose any of it. You have not eaten enough for weeks, and neither has any man on the road beside you. The winter that has come down on Ireland this year is, by cruel coincidence, the harshest anyone can remember. Snow lying for weeks, in a country where snow rarely lies at all, sleet off the Atlantic, winds that cut through the rags that were once your good coat. You break stones or dig cuttings from light to light. The pay, when the overseer's measurements and the paperwork allow it to arrive at all, and it is sometimes days late, which for a family with nothing is not an inconvenience, but a mortal danger. The pay comes to perhaps 8 or 10 pence a day, and food prices in the same months have doubled and more. The Indian meal that sold for a penny a pound under peel now costs 2, 3, and beyond, because this winter the government is not flooding any markets. A week of your labor in the frost buys less food than your family needs to stand still. You are, in the most literal sense, working at a loss, spending the body's strength faster than the wages can replace it. Men begin to faint at the works, then worse than faint. The relief officer's own reports that winter, record laborers dying on the roads they were building, and the phrase that echoes down the records is that men were dying with the tools in their hands. By the spring of 1847, there are 700,000 people on the public works. 700,000 digging and breaking and hauling, which with their families means several million people are trying to live on those wages. It is one of the largest relief undertakings any government has ever attempted, and it is failing in front of everyone's eyes, and the men running it know it. The clerk's letters from the districts grow desperate. The engineers write that the people are too weak to earn the task rates. The doctors write about what they are seeing in the cabins. And through it all, that other traffic on the winter roads continues too. The food moving toward the ports, respected and protected. There is a fever beginning now as well in the crowded works and the crowded cabins, and we will speak of it gently and briefly a little later, because it, more than hunger itself, is the true killer of these years. But the works are only half of this winter's story. The other half is happening behind you, back up the valley, in the cabins, the shop, the chapel, where a community is trying to hold itself together with its bare hands. Let's go home for a while through the snow and see how that is done. The first thing you'd notice, coming up the Boreen in the winter dusk of early 1847, is the smoke, or rather, how little of it there is. Half the chimneys of the townland are cold by afternoon, because turf, like everything else, was cut short last summer by hunger-weakened arms, and a fire is now a thing to be lit for the cooking and hoarded like the meal itself. Families have moved in together for warmth, 2 and 3 households under one roof, and in the coldest weeks, whole families simply stay in the bed through the daylight hours, not from despair, though there is despair, but as strategy, because a body lying still under every blanket in the house burns less of itself than a body moving through the cold. Everything that can be turned into food has begun its journey to the pawnbroker in the town, in a grimly logical order that every family follows like a liturgy. First the extras, the second cooking pot, the Sunday shawl, the good coat that has wintered in the pawnshop before and always come home. Then the fishing gear, as we saw on the coast. Then the blankets, in January blankets, and the tools, the loy and the grape, which is the moment the liturgy turns dangerous, because a family that pawns its spade has begun to spend the coming spring. The pawnshops of the West are so full this winter that they stop taking clothes. The shelves, as promised, are filling with things that no one will come back for. The shop is the other pole of the townland's orbit. The mealmonger's credit is the thinnest of all the threads holding families over the gap. An account book with your name in it, interest compounding quietly, your standing crop of debts growing where the potatoes used to. Some shopkeepers this winter carry half a parish on their books and go under doing it. Some grow rich in ways their names never recover from, and the poison of that word gombean enters the language for good. Meanwhile, the townland's own older economy, the mythial, the lending and minding and sharing between neighbors, is straining like a rope bridge with too many people on it. It does not snap. That is the wonder of the record, how long it holds, how many stories survive of the last handful of meal split between 2 doors. But it thins. Doors that were never shut are shut this winter, not from hardness of heart, from the terrible new arithmetic in which a handful given away is measured in your own children's flesh. At the center of it all, in most townlands, stands the chapel and the priest, and his opposite numbers in the parishes of the other faith, because it should be said plainly that the clergy of every denomination mostly rise to these years and pay for it. The priest this winter is many things at once: the writer of letters to the relief committee and the newspapers, the keeper of the list of the truly destitute, the negotiator with the agent, the one literate man many families can send their troubles through. He is also on the roads at all hours with the oils for the dying, in and out of the fever cabins that everyone else has learned to walk wide of, and priests and ministers and doctors die of typhus this year and next in numbers that read like a casualty list, because they were the ones who kept going in. And the townland does one more thing this winter, perhaps the most stubborn thing of all. It keeps its customs for as long as the strength lasts. The dead are waked even now, shorter wakes, poorer ones, a pipe and a candle where there used to be a full house for 2 nights. But waked, witnessed, walked to the churchyard on shoulders, and put down decently among their own. Of all the losses the record grieves, the one the old people would speak of afterward with the lowest voices was the point, in the very worst places, in the very worst months, when even this gave way, when the customs that make a death a human event could no longer be kept. We will not go into those rooms tonight. It is enough to say that the townland fought for its rituals the way it fought for its children, and that the fight itself, the coffin somehow found, the grave somehow dug by men who could barely stand, is as much a part of the story of these years as any act of Parliament, and a far better measure of the people the acts were failing. That is the home front, drowsy traveler, strategy, sacrifice, arithmetic, and stubbornness, holding on by the fingernails through the snow. And as that terrible winter finally begins to loosen its grip, word comes up the valley that London has changed course at last. The works are to be wound down. The government itself has conceded what your townland knew by Christmas, that wages are not food, and in their place rises, with remarkable speed, the one relief measure of the great hunger that historians almost universally praise, the soup kitchens. It begins, oddly enough, with the Quakers. The Society of Friends, a small religious community, merchants and millers, many of them, with members in Dublin and Cork and London, decided in the terrible November of 1846 that reports and resolutions were not enough, and simply started feeding people. They imported boilers, set up soup shops in the worst towns, sent their own members west to see with their own eyes and write down what they saw, and their accounts, sober, precise, and heartbroken, remain some of the most trusted testimony of the whole period. They asked nothing of the people they fed, no labor test, no questions, no sermons, a point worth making, because elsewhere a few evangelical outfits did tie food to religious conversion, and the bitter word souperism was coined, and the shame of taking the soup in that sense lasted generations in folk memory. The Quakers' soup carried no such price, and Ireland has never forgotten the difference. To this day, their name stands green in the country's memory, and their example proves something to the government. Direct feeding works, and it is cheap, far cheaper, in fact, than the works had been. So in the spring of 1847, Parliament passes the Temporary Relief Act, and across Ireland, parish by parish, the boilers go up. Great cauldrons in sheds and at crossroads, fired from dawn, cooking a porridge of meal and rice, stirabout the people call it, ladled out daily, a pound of it per adult, with bread sometimes, to anyone the local committee lists as destitute. Walk with your family to the boiler in the gray morning with your tin can and your ticket and stand in the line. The line is long and it is quiet, and it contains people you have known your whole life standing publicly in a place they prayed never to stand, for there is a hot shame in it, and old people in future years will speak of the queue at the boiler with their eyes down. But take the full measure of what this ugly, humiliating, life saving machine achieves, because the number is worth saying slowly. By the height of that summer, the soup kitchens of Ireland are feeding 3 million people every day. 3 million, more than a third of the entire nation, fed daily by an operation assembled from nothing in a few months. It is one of the largest feeding programs in the history of the world to that date, and it works. Where the boilers operate, starvation essentially stops. The summer of 1847 is soft and blightless. The tiny potato crop, tiny because after 2 ruined years there was almost no seed left in the country to plant, comes up sound, and that healthy little harvest becomes, in London's ledgers, the excuse the Treasury has been waiting for. The blight is over, the emergency is ended, the extraordinary measures may now cease. In the autumn of 1847, at the height of a famine, with 3 million people on the daily ration, the soup kitchens are ordered closed. From now on, London rules. Irish distress is a local Irish expense. Relief will come only through the Irish Poor Law, funded by rates squeezed from Irish property, from landlords whose rents have collapsed, and farmers who are barely surviving themselves, and delivered through one institution and one institution only, the workhouse. And so, drowsy traveler, we come to the doors that everyone in your world has spent their whole lives dreading. Take a slow breath. We will walk through them together, and I will keep a careful hold of the lantern. Every market town in Ireland has one, and they all look alike, because they were all designed by the same man to the same plan, in the same gray decade before the blight. A tall stone building behind a wall at the edge of town, deliberately plain, deliberately forbidding. The workhouse. There are 130 of them across the island, one for each poor law union, and they were built to hold altogether about 100,000 people, a number their designers considered generous, since the whole point of the system was that almost no one should ever want to come in. That is the founding principle, imported from England and stated quite openly. The workhouse must be less attractive than the meanest life outside it, so that only the truly desperate will enter. No one is dragged to the workhouse. You must ask to be admitted. And the price of admission, the thing that made generations shudder at the very word, is this: you must give up everything. Your holding must be surrendered. Your cabin, your patch, your standing in the townland, gone before the door opens. And at the door, the family that walks in together is taken apart. Men to one ward, women to another, boys and girls to their own, husbands from wives, mothers from all but their smallest children. You will sleep under the same roof, and you may barely see each other, and this too is by design. Inside, a uniform of rough cloth, your own clothes taken and stored, a day ruled by the bell. Rise, pray, work, eat, work, pray, sleep. The work is chosen to be dull on purpose. Men breaking stones in the yard, picking oakum, teasing old tar-stiffened rope apart into fibers until the fingers crack. Women at the wash tubs and the endless cleaning. meals of stirabout and milk, bread and soup, eaten at long tables, at first in enforced silence. It is a machine for making poverty orderly, and in a normal year it stands 3/4 empty, holding only those with nowhere else at all, the very old, the abandoned, the orphaned. These are not normal years. When the soup kitchens close in the autumn of 1847 and the workhouse becomes the only door, Ireland's desperate arrive at that door in their hundreds of thousands. Buildings made for 400 hold 1,000 and more. Sheds, stables, and hired stores are pressed into service as auxiliary wards. And into these packed rooms comes the thing we must now name quietly, the true executioner of the great hunger, fever. Typhus and its cousin relapsing fever, carried by the lice that no crowded, exhausted population can escape, and dysentery alongside them, running wherever hunger has gone first. Famine's arithmetic in Ireland, as in every such catastrophe in history, is that disease kills far more than starvation itself. Hunger opens the gate, and fever walks through. It burns through the workhouses, the auxiliary sheds, the emigrant ships, and it does something starvation never did. It climbs. Doctors, priests, ministers, relief workers, the matrons and clerks of the workhouses themselves, the people who stood closest to the sick, die in extraordinary numbers, and their names fill a long and honorable roll that both islands and every creed have a share in. We will not stay in the fever sheds, drowsy traveler. It is enough to know they were there, and that they were, for hundreds of thousands, the last room. What should be remembered alongside them is this. Even at the very bottom of the system, there were people who chose to walk in and help, over and over, knowing exactly what it might cost, and it cost many of them everything. The record of these years is not only a record of abandonment, it is also, in its dark way, a record of courage, most of it anonymous, much of it fatal, all of it real. You, our courtier, have not yet reached the workhouse door. You have been holding on, half an acre of hope at a time. But in the winter of 1847 and 48, the system finds one more way to pull the ground from under families like yours, and this one comes with paperwork. It is a single sentence in an Act of Parliament, and it will empty more of Ireland than the blight itself. The people call it the Gregory Clause, after the gentleman who proposed it, and it says, in effect, this: no one holding more than 1/4 of an acre of land shall receive relief. Read it again slowly, the way it was read aloud at chapel gates and market crosses, so that everyone would understand. If you hold land, even 2 acres, even 1, you are, in the eyes of the law, a landholder, and landholders are not destitute, and the workhouse and the relief lists are closed to you and to your children. Unless you give the land up. Surrender the holding, tumble your own cabin walls in some districts to prove it, hand the patch back to the landlord, and then you are properly, officially, completely destitute, and the union must receive you. For a small farmer or a cottier, the clause is a door with a blade in it. The land is everything, not just this year's food, but every future year, the whole meaning of the family's generations of labor. To give it up for a winter's rations is to trade forever for now. Families split over it. Some hold on past all reason, eating the seed, selling the roof timbers, and the holding kills them. Some sign and walk to the union and survive, landless, into a future with nothing in it but the boat. There is no good answer, and that is not an accident. The clause was designed by men who believed Ireland's small holdings were the disease itself, and that clearing them, however it happened, was the cure. And where the clause pulls, the crowbar pushes. Because for a certain kind of landlord, bankrupt or absentee, or simply done with the whole arithmetic of tiny rents and rising poor rates, the catastrophe is also an opportunity. An estate cleared of paupers pays fewer rates and can be turned to cattle and sheep. So through the late 1840s and beyond, across whole townlands come the evictions. The sheriff, the police escort, the hired crew with crowbars, the family's few sticks of furniture set out in the lane, and then the ritual that gives the era its bitterest word, the tumbling. The crowbar men pull down the roof tree and lever the walls in, so that no one can creep back into shelter, and by evening, the cabin where 4 generations were born is a low mound of stones, with the thatch folded into it like a closed eye. In the famine decade and just after, some 250,000 people are formally evicted, and the informal clearances, the quiet surrenders, the quarter-acre signings, the leases simply not renewed, take uncounted more. Some evicted families are taken in by neighbors, doubling up in cabins already hungry, because the old law of the townland holds even now. Some build scalps, roofed pits dug into the ditches, until they are moved on again. Most, sooner or later, walk to the Union, to the town, to the port. It must be said, for the record's honesty, that there were other landlords, resident gentry who forgave rents wholesale, mortgaged themselves feeding their tenants, and in some cases died of the fever they met doing it. More than one great house went down with the cabins it tried to save. History holds them in the same hand with the crowbar brigades, because both were real. But the shape of the decade is the shape of the clearances. Between death and eviction and flight, the cabin class of Ireland, the whole teeming, storytelling, fiddle-playing world we sat inside at the beginning of tonight's journey, is being deleted from the landscape, townland by townland. You would think by now that this story could not possibly hold more road. But the cruelest fact about the Great Hunger, the one that separates it from a disaster and makes it an era, is how long it goes on. So let's walk the last stretch of it, the years the textbooks skim when the world had stopped watching and Ireland was still starving. The story you usually hear has a shape: blight in 1845, horror in Black 47, and then presumably an ending. The people who lived it were given no such shape. In the summer of 1848, after the soup kitchens had been dismantled, after London had declared the emergency over, after 3 years that had already taken more than any nation should be asked to give, the weather turned soft and wet in July, and the smell came back into the gardens, and the blight of 1848 destroyed the potato as completely as 1846 had done. Try to feel the weight of that from the inside, gently, at this safe distance. Not the first blow, which fell on a healthy people with a pig by the door and neighbors to lean on, but a 4th year, falling on a population already spent, savings gone, gear pawned, credit exhausted, the mithiel stretched to breaking, 1,000,000 graves already dug, and the strongest of the young already in Boston or Liverpool. The relief system that met this failure was the poor law alone, the workhouses and their outdoor relief lists, funded by rates wrung from a bankrupt countryside. In the poorest Western unions, the arithmetic became openly impossible. Districts where nearly everyone was destitute were ordered to tax themselves to feed themselves. When richer unions and Britain were asked to help carry them, a scheme called the Rate in Aid, the resentments it stirred in every direction told their own story about how thin the idea of a shared kingdom had worn. And into this exhausted landscape, in 1849, came one more horseman, cholera, sweeping through the ports and the workhouses and the packed towns, taking tens of thousands who had survived everything else. The year 1849 barely appears in popular memory, wedged in the shadow of Black 47, and yet in parts of the West, it and 1850 were the hungriest years of all. Deaths in some Western unions peaked not in 1847, but at the very end of the decade, when the world's newspapers had long moved on. That is a pattern worth carrying out of tonight into every disaster you'll ever read about. The cameras leave before the dying stops. Two smaller scenes from those last years, and then we'll go to the ships. In the summer of 1849, Queen Victoria visited Ireland, Cork, Dublin, cheering crowds, fireworks, illuminated streets, a triumph by every account in the loyal press, and the strangeness of those accounts, set beside the workhouse returns from Mayo in the same month, is its own quiet document of how two realities can share one island. And in the same year, Parliament passed the Encumbered Estates Act, a piece of machinery for auctioning off the bankrupt estates of the old landlord class. And down they came at last, the great names, their debts called in, their houses and townlands sold at a discount to new men with new money. If there is satisfaction in watching the top of the pyramid fall, hold it loosely. The new purchasers bought at commercial prices with commercial intentions, and for the smallholders still clinging on, new ownership very often meant one thing: clearance, conducted this time with fresh capital and no ancestral embarrassment. The crowbar years ran on into the 1850s under new management. The blight itself faded rather than ended, a diminishing haunt of the crop through 1849 and 1850, then quiet. No bell rang, no proclamation declared the hunger over. It ended the way a long fever ends, one ordinary autumn, call it 1851, 1852, in the worst places, when the potatoes came up sound and were pitted and kept, and the townland's talk at the chapel gate was of prices and weather again, and everyone understood without saying so that they were standing in the afterward. A different people in a different country, counting who was left. Your family will not be among the counted. The decision has been arriving for 2 years, in every cold season and every notice on the chapel door, and now it arrives for the last time, in the plainest form it takes. It is a soft evening in the spring of 1849, and your wife is looking at you across the fire, and on the table between you, where the skib of potatoes used to sit, there is a letter from her brother in Boston, and inside it, passage money. It is time to talk about the ships. Emigration is not new in your world. The Spalpeens have crossed to England for generations, and for 30 years, a steady stream of the young and the landless has gone out to British North America and the United States. What the hunger does is turn the stream into a sea. In the famine decade and the years just after, somewhere around 2 million people leave Ireland, from an island of 8.5 million. Set against everything else these years take, it is emigration, even more than death, that empties the valleys. And your townland has evolved a ceremony for it, one of the most quietly devastating customs any culture has ever produced. It is called the American Wake. It is held the night before departure in the cabin of the family that is losing someone, and it is called a wake because that is precisely what it is. A wake is what you hold for the dead, and everyone in the room understands that the young man or woman leaving at dawn is, for all earthly purposes, dying out of this community. There will be no visits home. The passage is one way. The distance, for people who have never traveled 20 miles, might as well be the moon. Letters will come, please God, and money folded inside them, but the face across the fire tonight will never be seen again by most of the people looking at it. So the neighbors gather, exactly as they would for a death. There is food scraped together, even now. There are songs, and this is the night the old songs earn their keep, the songs of exile that Irish has been polishing for centuries, and new verses are made for the one who is going. There is dancing, sometimes wild dancing, grief wearing joy's clothes for a few hours, the old women keen, the ancient formal weeping, the same as they would over a coffin. And at first light, the whole townland walks the emigrant down the road to the crossroads, or the bend, the convoy it is called, and the mother very often stands at the cabin door rather than walk it, because there is a point past which some things cannot be watched. Now it is your family at the center of the room. The passage money from Boston, a remittance, the first link in a chain that will define Irish emigration for a century, each traveler sending home the fare for the next, covers steerage for 4. Your holding is surrendered, the Gregory arithmetic settled that long ago. What you own fits in one wooden chest and 2 bundles. Somewhere in the bundles, your wife has hidden a sod of turf and a handful of earth from the potato ridge, and she is far from the only woman on the roads of Ireland carrying her townland in her apron. The walk to the port town takes 2 days. The port is a bedlam of carts, agents, brokers, runners, and grief and paper, notices for ships with hopeful names, Star of the West, Industry, Perseverance. Most emigrants this year go by way of Liverpool, deck passage across the Irish Sea, packed among cattle, then the great ships west. The Atlantic fare in steerage is a few pounds ahead, which is why the very poorest of all, the truly destitute, mostly do not emigrate at all. Even flight costs money, and the hunger's cruelest sorting is that the people in the most danger are the ones who cannot afford to run. And Liverpool deserves a moment of its own, because for the famine Irish, it is the great funnel of the whole exodus, and for a vast number of them, it is as far as the money goes. The steam packet across the Irish Sea costs shillings where the Atlantic costs pounds, so the poorest of those who fly get exactly this far, across one narrow sea into the most overcrowded port city in Europe. In the single year of 1847, some 300,000 Irish land at Liverpool into a town whose own population is not much bigger, and the city staggers under them. The cellars of the dockside parishes fill beyond anything the sanitary inspectors have words for. The fever crosses with the people, and Liverpool's own doctors and clergy die that year in the same sad numbers as their counterparts across the water. Those with fares sail on west within days or weeks. Those without stay and dig in, and their children become the Liverpool Irish, and Glasgow and Manchester and the mining valleys receive their own share of the scattering, so that when you hear the famine called the making of Irish America, remember that it was also, just as surely, the making of Irish Britain, one packet load of the desperate at a time. There are other doors out for the few who can reach them. Some landlords, a minority, with mixed motives that historians still weigh case by case, pay to ship their surplus tenants to Canada, whole townlands at a time, a practice called assisted emigration that lands somewhere between rescue and expulsion, depending on the landlord, the ship, and the year. The colonial government runs schemes of its own. Several thousand orphan girls are taken from the workhouses in these years and given free passage to Australia, where the colonies are short of women. Teenagers with a workhouse issue box of clothes and a Bible sailing alone to the far side of the earth to be domestic servants, and in time, the great grandmothers of a remarkable share of that continent, which remembers them now with monuments and honor. And a steady trickle goes out under sentence rather than choice for the small, desperate crimes of hungry years. Boston, Brooklyn, Liverpool, Quebec, Sydney, Van Diemen's Land. The townlands of the West are being dealt out across the whole map of the English-speaking world. One family, one girl, one convict, one coffin at a time. But your road runs west, so let's take it. The ship, when you finally climb its side, is a merchant sailing vessel, a timber ship, very likely, that carries Canadian lumber east and finds it profitable to carry people west in the emptied hold. Steerage is that hold, a single low deck, rows of rough wooden berths, 6 feet square, with 4 people to a berth, no portholes, no privacy, ventilation by hatchway when the weather allows the hatches open at all. Passengers cook their own rations at a few shared fireboxes on deck, queuing in the wind. The law requires the ship to issue 7 pounds of provisions a week, mostly meal and hard bread, and water that goes foul by the 3rd week. The crossing takes 6 weeks if the winds are kind. They are not always kind. You know the name history gives these vessels. In the worst year, 1847, Black 47, the cheap Canadian routes filled with fever, along with the hungry, and on some ships, 1 passenger in 5, even 1 in 3, did not live to see land, and the name coffin ship attached itself and never let go. It should be said honestly that this was the terrible peak, and not the whole story. In ordinary years, the great majority of emigrant ships arrived with the great majority of their people, but 1847 burned itself into the world's memory and into the quarantine station at Grosse Îles in the St. Lawrence, where thousands of the fleeing came ashore, only to die within sight of the New World, and where a stone cross on the hill remembers them still, in Irish, in one of the loneliest inscriptions on earth. Your ship, in the softer season of 1849, is luckier, hard, hungry, seasick, endless, but lucky. And on a morning in the 7th week, a shout comes down the hatchway, and the whole groaning hold empties up the ladders, and there on the western rim of the ocean is a low gray line that is not cloud, land, the other side, the rest of your life. The Irish who come ashore from the famine ships in Boston, New York, Quebec, St. John, Liverpool for the many who get no further, are not the emigrants America was used to. Earlier arrivals came with trades, with a little capital, with plans. The famine Irish arrived with what the hold left them: exhausted, often sick, mostly penniless, many with no English, from a world of turf fires and townlands, landing in cities of coal smoke and cash wages that have no idea what to do with them. The runners meet the ships, sharp men, some with familiar accents, which is its own small heartbreak, steering the green arrivals to boarding houses that eat their last shillings. The work that is open to you is the work no one else wants. For men, the pick and the shovel, digging the canals, grading the railroads, hauling on the docks. For women, and Irish women emigrate in numbers no other nation matches, half the whole exodus and more. Domestic service, the kitchens and laundries of other people's houses, work despised and steady, and it is the steadiness that matters, because the Bridgets of America, as the newspapers condescendingly call them, will become one of the great engines of the remittance chain, sending home a staggering share of their wages year after year to lift the next sister, the next cousin, onto the boat. The neighborhoods that receive you are the cheapest and hardest in the New World: the cellar lodgings of Boston, the packed wards of New York's Five Points, and the welcome is not warm. The signs and the notices that pass into legend, the cartoons in the smart magazines, the political parties organized in plain words against you. The famine Irish arrive at the bottom of a society that lets them know it. And yet, hold this beside it, because both are true. The same cities hold the countrymen who came before, the parish that forms around the new church within a year or two, the labor gangs where a townland's men stick together, the societies and the saloons and the savings clubs, the whole apparatus of a people rebuilding itself from the timbers of the wreck. It will work. Not for everyone. The first famine generation pays in full, in the fever wards and the tenements and the tunnels, and many of them never see daylight above the bottom rung. But their children will be foremen and police and priests and school teachers, and their grandchildren will be everywhere, and the arc that starts in the steerage hold bends over a century toward parades down Fifth Avenue and a famine emigrant's great-grandson taking the oath of office as President of the United States. No people in the modern world has traveled quite that distance from quite that start, and the passage money that paid for the first mile of it was mailed home, a few dollars at a time, by servant girls and ditch diggers who never owned a thing in their lives but the chain they built behind them. And one more thing belongs here, before we sail our memory back east to the valley, a small story that Ireland has never forgotten and never will. In the spring of 1847, word of the hunger having crossed the world, a collection was taken up for Irish relief by a people who had walked their own death road only 16 years before. The Choctaw Nation, removed from their lands along the Trail of Tears, gathered from their own scarcity a gift of around $170 and sent it across the ocean to feed strangers they would never meet. It was not the largest donation of that remarkable year. Money came from the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, from convicts in Australia, from Boston, which sent a warship, the Jamestown, packed to the gunwales with food. But the Choctaw gift is the one carved deepest in Irish memory: kindness from the far bottom of someone else's suffering. A century and a half later, A sculpture of silver feathers stands in a cork field to honor it, and when hardship visited the Choctaw and Navajo nations in recent times, Irish donations poured across the ocean in the other direction, tens of thousands of them, most with the same message attached: we remember. Hold that, drowsy traveler, like a warm stone in the pocket of this cold story. Now, gently, the way memory travels, let's go back to Ireland and ask the question the whole night has been walking toward: who came through and why them? Let's stand back now, the way you can only do at night, at a distance of nearly 2 centuries, and look at the whole map of these years at once. The blight itself fell on the entire island. The spores did not check the county boundaries. But the hunger did not fall evenly, not remotely, and the pattern of where it fell hardest is the whole answer to tonight's title. Lay a map of the dying over a map of the land system, and they are the same map. The West and Southwest, Mayo, Galway, Clare, West Cork, Kerry, the beautiful and terrible Atlantic seaboard, where the holdings were smallest, the potato dependents most total, the towns fewest, and the landlords most absent. That is where the parish registers go dark. The East and Northeast, with bigger farms, mixed crops, wages, industry in the towns, and shorter roads to a port, bend under the same years and do not break in the same way. In parts of Ulster and the eastern counties, the famine decade is a hard passage. In parts of Mayo, it is an extinction event, with whole townlands simply absent from the next census, their names surviving only on the maps and in the mouths of emigrants. Now bring it down from the map to the person, because this is the heart of it. Imagine two men, both 26 in 1845, both hard workers, both quick and careful and brave, the same man, really, set down in two different places. One holds 30 acres of mixed tillage in County Meath, sells oats and cattle, keeps the potato as one crop among several, and has a market town with a railway station 6 miles off. The other, you, our courtier, holds 1 conifer acre of lumpers in West Mayo, pays his rent in labor, and stands 4 days' walk from anywhere money lives. The blight strikes both their gardens identically. For the first man, the famine years are dreadful. Prices, rates, fear, hungry laborers at his gate, perhaps the fever in his own house. But his children are alive in 1852. For the second man, nothing he does, no effort, no cleverness, no virtue, can move the arithmetic that 3 million people had already been standing on before the first stalk blackened. 1 plant, no reserve, no rights, no reach. That is what "you wouldn't survive" means tonight, and it is worth saying with care, because it is the opposite of an insult to the dead. The people the hunger took were not weaker than the people it spared. Within the same doomed townlands, survival turned on margins almost too small to see. A shore within walking distance, and the strength left to work it. A son already in Boston in 1845. So the remittance chain had its first link before the crisis came. A resident landlord instead of an absent one. A berth on a ship that sailed in June rather than February. A fever that arrived after the soup kitchen opened rather than before. The old people afterward mostly refused to explain their survival with any story of merit. Asked how they came through when the neighbors didn't, they'll answer that comes down through the folklore collections again and again is some version of the plainest sentence in the language: God spared us, and I don't know why. And because it is night, and because you are drifting, Let's honor the ones who bent every margin they had. The women who walked 10 miles to a depot and 10 miles home with the meal on their backs. The fishermen who pawned their nets to feed the children, one of the era's quietest tragedies, the coast's own tools traded away just when the sea mattered most, and the neighbors who shared boats after, the teachers who kept schools open so the ration could reach the children through them, the clergy of every denomination who wrote the letters, worked the committees, buried the dead, and so often joined them, the emigrant girls whose wages crossed the ocean for 30 years without missing a season. None of them could move the map. All of them moved the margins, and the margins are why there is an Ireland at all on the far side of these years, and why there are 70 million people around the world tonight who trace their line through some cabin that held on. So, it is 1852. The blight, after striking again in 48 and lingering in the corners of the country to the end of the decade, has finally burned out. The rain falls on a different island now. Let's walk it one last time. Walk the valley in 1852, and the first thing you notice is what you don't hear. The townland that held 40 cabins holds 11. The gables of the rest stand roofless in the nettles, or lie tumbled into the green mounds that the whole west of Ireland will wear from now on, quiet as barrows. Where the potato ridges ran, the old corrugations still show under the grass. They show to this day, 2 centuries on, corduroy shadows on hillsides no plow has touched since, so that the land itself became the famine's memorial without anyone intending it. The census takers of 1851 put numbers on the silence. An island of about 8.5 million people in 1845 counts 6.5 million now. A million dead in round and inadequate figures, most of them, as we said, taken by fever rather than hunger itself, most of them in the West, very many of them children, more than 1 million gone over the sea, with the chain letters already pulling the next million after them. And the leaving does not stop. That is the strangest and saddest afterward of all. The hunger ends, but the emptying it began runs on for 100 years. Emigration becomes not a crisis, but a custom, the expected fate of most children born on a Western farm, and the population of Ireland falls, census after census, until the middle of the 20th century, the only country in modern Europe with fewer people in 1950 than in 1840. The land consolidates, the tiny holdings never come back, the fields get bigger, and the townlands quieter. Marriage comes later and less often. A certain caution, a certain dread of the shameful fate of the man who lost his land, settles deep into the culture and stays. The Irish language takes the blow we saw coming on that ceilidh night. The hunger fell most heavily on exactly the districts, the classes, the generations where Irish lived, and the emigration that followed taught the survivors a brutal lesson about which language the boat and the wage packet spoke. Parents who had the old tongue raised children deliberately without it, out of love, the way you'd keep a child away from a field you'd seen flood. Within 2 generations, the language of the Seanchaí and the songs holds only the western fringes, where it holds on yet, cherished now, taught now, sung now, but never again the water everyone swam in. Even the silence had a silence inside it. For a long time, generations, the people who came through spoke very little of these years, And when the folklore collectors went out in the 1930s and 40s with their notebooks, they found the grandchildren of the survivors still lowering their voices, still saying that the old people wouldn't talk about it, still pointing out without comment the field where the cabins were, the mass paths, the children's burial grounds. Some memories were too heavy to hand down whole, and some were handed down anyway in the shapes grief takes when it can't speak plainly, in an inherited horror of wasting food, in the habit which Irish emigrant families carried around the world of never letting a guest leave hungry, in the songs, in the long political memory that would shape the century to come. But hear the end of the story, too, because it does not end in the nettles. The island survived. The people who left carried the townlands with them and planted them in Boston and Brooklyn, in Liverpool and London, in Sydney and Toronto and Buenos Aires, until the parish became a planet. Some 70 million people today, on every continent, hold a thread that runs back through some famine-era cabin door. The country they left grew, in the fullness of time, free, and then prosperous, and then, the kind of turn history rarely grants, became one of the world's most generous nations, per person, in famine relief, a country whose response to hunger anywhere is written in its own oldest memory. The great hunger's monuments stand now in Dublin and Boston and Toronto and Sydney. Its museum keeps the record at Strokestown, in a landlord's house whose own story it does not soften. And every year, on a Sunday in spring, Ireland keeps a national day of commemoration, and the ridges on the hillsides keep theirs. The fire we lit at the beginning of tonight, the hearth that was never let go out, was quenched in 100,000 cabins in those years, and it was carried, banked and glowing, in 100,000 chests and bundles and memories over the water into the next world and the next century, where it burns yet in rooms all over the earth, some of them, perhaps, very near wherever you are lying, listening tonight. And so we come back, slowly, to the present, to your own room, your own pillow, your own century, where the wind outside your window owes you nothing, and the kitchen holds more food than a townland saw in a season. Tonight we walked through one of the heaviest chapters in the history of any nation, and we did it the way this channel always tries to, gently, honestly, and with our eyes on the people rather than the abstractions. If you take one thing into your dreams, let it be the answer we found at the center. Survival in the Great Hunger was never a test of worth. The ones who were lost were not less than the ones who came through, and the ones who came through spent the rest of their lives knowing it. What saw people to the far side, where anything could, was margins, a shore, a sister in Boston, a fair landlord, a boiler at the crossroads, a neighbor's roof. Kindness in that world was not a sentiment. It was infrastructure. It still is. And if your own family carries a thread of the story, a name that got off a boat, a county remembered vaguely from a grandmother's talk, a habit of loading every guest's plate, then you were part of tonight's history all along, and the comment section below is a fine place to add your thread to the record. The oldest story your family still tells. I mean that request every time. The fire is banked now. The valley is quiet. The long grass moving over the old ridges. The stars out over the Atlantic. The same stars exactly that stood over the lumber gardens and the coffin ships and the boilers and the wakes. History is heavy, but it is not yours to carry tonight. You listened. That is its own small act of remembrance, and it is enough. Let your breathing slow now. Let the last images go soft. The turf smoke, the firelight on a whitewashed wall, a story in an old language filling a warm room. Tomorrow is an ordinary day, and you are safe, and the door of sleep is standing open. Rest easy. Sleep well. This is Drowsy History.